This story is a fictional work created for entertainment. It does not depict real people, real events, or any official military actions. At 1940 on June 14, 2024, I dragged myself out of the Humvee after 36 hours at the Pinon Canyon training site. My uniform was coated in red dust, my boots stiff with sweat and dirt, and my brain felt half melted from heat and exhaustion. All I wanted was a shower, a protein bar, and sleep before briefing at sunrise. But when I reached the Bravo Company barracks at Fort Carson, I stopped so suddenly that the soldier walking behind me bumped into my rucksack. The entire courtyard was lit up as if someone had hired a wedding planner. String lights hung across the walkways in neat, glowing rows. Folding tables covered in white linen filled the lawn. Expensive catering trays steamed under silver lids. A DJ booth blasted music so loud it vibrated against my chest plate. And the parking area. Good God, the parking area. Rows of rental SUVs, Lexus sedans out of state plates from Texas, Utah, Arizona. These were not soldiers. These were civilians, lots of them, on federal property, without authorization. My authorization. I pushed forward, confusion turning into the first sharp sting of anger. A catering worker carrying a tray of champagne flutes brushed past me and spilled cold liquid down my sleeve. Without even looking up, he said, "Sorry, ma'am, your stepfamily told us you were just the cleaner tonight." Cleaner? The sudden humiliation hit harder than the spill. I looked toward the second-floor balcony. There they were. Linda Hale, my stepmother, perfect blonde curls, a sparkling dress that caught the courtyard lights, and beside her my stepsister Noelle in a bright engagement gown with champagne in hand, both laughing, both waving at guests as if they were hosting a gala at some private estate rather than trespassing inside an army barracks. I felt the heat rise slowly under my collar. Linda spotted me first. Her smile sharpened. Then she lifted her glass and projected her voice across the courtyard. "Oh, do not mind her. She is only here to sweep up after the party." A ripple of laughter spread across the guests. They did not know me. They did not know I was a captain. They did not know they were standing on federal property without clearance. They only knew what Linda told them. And Linda had always known exactly how to demean without touching a single nerve directly. I stepped forward and forced my voice steady. "Linda, this is federal property." Her eyes sparkled with condescension. "Relax, sweetheart. You never used this place anyway. We made a little reservation. It will be fine." The lie was delivered so smoothly it almost had rhythm, but something in my stomach went cold. No civilian can access an army barracks without someone providing credentials. No one gets inside without digital approval from a supervising officer. And the supervising officer for Bravo Company was me, which meant only one thing. Someone had impersonated my authority. I stood there in my dust-covered uniform, sweat drying on my skin, staring at the party my own stepmother had illegally staged in my barracks, and for the first time that day, I felt completely awake. A black SUV rolled to a stop near the walkway. The rear door opened. Major General Randall Pierce stepped out with a folder under his arm. He scanned the scene, then locked eyes with me. His expression was grave. "Captain Hale, we need to talk. If you have ever been publicly humiliated by your own family, tell me in the comments. I want to know I am not alone." Major General Randall Pierce did not raise his voice as he spoke, but the weight behind every syllable pressed down on the air like incoming storm clouds. "Captain Hale, walk with me." Even in my sweat-soaked uniform and dust-stained boots, I straightened instinctively. I fell into step beside him as we crossed the courtyard, weaving between tables draped in white linen and clusters of laughing civilians holding champagne flutes. None of them knew they were standing on federal property without authorization. None of them knew the man walking next to me held 2 stars on his shoulder and controlled nearly every operational decision on this installation. But I knew. And the fact that he had walked directly into this chaos told me the problem was far worse than I imagined. When we reached the main walkway, he stopped and pointed to the far wall of the barracks. "There, Captain. Tell me what you see." At first, I thought it was just another decorative banner Linda had hung to make the place look like a wedding venue. But when I stepped closer, my stomach dropped. A large printed sign stood on an easel next to the entrance to the common room. Private event, hosted by Hale family. I read it twice. Hosted by Hale family. My stepmother had taken my last name and stamped it onto an army facility as if it were her personal ranch. More guests spilled out of the double doors carrying plates loaded with catered hors d'oeuvres. A photographer snapped pictures of couples posing in front of the unit insignia painted on the wall. One woman ran her hand over it and said to her friend, "This is such a lovely private lodge." I almost answered her before I stopped myself. This was beyond simple trespass. This was impersonation. This was calculated. General Pierce watched my reaction without blinking. "When did you authorize this, Captain?" I swallowed hard. "Sir, I did not. Not at any time." He nodded once. I expected that answer. "Come with me." We walked toward the duty office at the north end of the building. The office door was propped open, and the night duty barracks manager, a young specialist with worry creasing his forehead, stepped forward immediately. "Sir Captain Hale." "I am sorry, Ma. I thought this was approved." He held out a tablet with trembling hands. "Emails are posted here." The general stepped aside and let me take the tablet myself. I scrolled down. There it was. An email that looked almost exactly like my own format. Captain Jordan Hale approval request for event prior to facility renovation. My throat tightened. The sender was listed as Jordan. hi@army.mil. A single swapped letter. An I instead of an L. It would pass for legitimate at a quick glance. The message continued. Approved for use by Hale family for engagement celebration. Catering and guests cleared. No further supervision needed. B signed CPT Hale. The signature block was a copied version of mine down to the spacing and the rank abbreviation. The only thing missing was my CAC, which meant someone had fabricated digital authorization themselves and submitted it to the barracks manager during a shift change. The specialist ran a nervous hand over his neck. "Captain, they said it was a family military tradition and that you would confirm later." I wanted to reassure him that this was not his fault. He did what any young enlisted soldier would do when faced with an email that looked like it came from a commissioned officer. But the words stuck in my throat for a moment as the shock washed over me. Linda had not just broken into the barracks. She had staged an entire event. She had created an email that required enough knowledge of Army formatting to fool staff. She had used my rank to sign off on a $60,000 celebration. And worst of all, the specialist added quietly, "They said you would not be coming back tonight, Ma-am, so they wanted everything set up before dark." A cold clarity settled over me. They planned this. They knew my training schedule. They assumed I would not return until morning. They knew exactly how to work around the system to avoid being questioned. Linda had always been manipulative, but this was another level. This was strategy. This was intent. General Pierce stepped closer. "Captain, what are your thoughts?" I forced myself to focus. "Sir, this is unauthorized occupation of a federal barracks. There is fabricated digital communication using my name. Civilian vendors are operating without a contract. Further legal issues may apply." He nodded slowly. "And what do you believe is their motive?" I took a breath and let the answer settle before speaking. "Sir, it appears they wanted to use military property to host a private engagement event while avoiding all associated costs or approvals. And they used my identity to execute it." The general set his jaw. "Captain Hale, this is no small matter. Misuse of installation facilities is one thing. Impersonating a federal officer is another." I braced for the order to shut the whole event down. I expected MPs to flood the courtyard any second, but instead he said something I did not anticipate. "Before we proceed, I want to understand the full scope. You know these individuals. Get your bearings. Gather what you need. When you are ready, you will brief me." It was trust. Not pity. Trust. He expected me to lead. Even here, even now, while covered in dust and humiliated by my own family in front of civilians. "Yes, sir." I stepped back into the courtyard. Music blared, glasses clinked, people laughed under lights that had no business being strung between army buildings. And while watching my stepmother hold court as if she owned the installation, I felt my anger shift into something razor sharp: purpose. If you were in my position, what would you do next? Long before Fort Carson and the Pinon Canyon training rotations and the silver star on General Pierce's chest, my world was much smaller. It was a single-story brick house on the outskirts of Amarillo, Texas, where the wind never stopped and the dirt settled in everything. I grew up there with a mother who loved me fiercely and a father who tried his best, though he was always worn down by long hours at the feed mill. My earliest memories are simple ones: my mother braiding my hair before school, my father handing me cold lemonade after I helped him fix a fence, our dog Scout sleeping at the foot of my bed. There was nothing glamorous about our life, but it was stable and safe, and for a while, that was enough. My mother died when I was 8. Too young to understand what heart failure meant, old enough to understand the silence that followed. My father drifted for months. He went to work, came home, ate in silence, and stared at the empty chair where my mother used to sit. People in town told him he needed companionship, someone to help him raise a little girl, someone to fill the emptiness. Enter Linda. She arrived like a gust of perfume and bright jewelry, loud laughter, and expensive handbags that never matched the rest of Amarillo. She worked at a salon on the other side of town and carried herself like someone destined for bigger places. My father was flattered she paid attention to him. I was too young to know what it meant when adults said she was ambitious, and too polished for our dusty little community. At first, she was nice. Too nice. She complimented my hair, brought me sweets, told my father it was time to brighten the house. Then, slowly, little by little, the shift happened. Compliments turned into comparisons. Comparisons turned into subtle disapproval. You would be prettier if you smiled more, Jordan. Try to be gentle like Noelle. Sit straight. Be graceful. Do not stomp around like that. She said those things casually, with a soft pat on the head as if she were helping me. But beneath every word was the message I learned too quickly: I was not enough. The day she moved in, she brought her daughter Noelle with her. Noelle was 2 years younger than me. Blonde hair, big blue eyes, soft voice. Everything Linda wanted the world to admire. From the moment they arrived, it was clear they were a pair, and I was an outsider in my own home. My father tried, he really did, but he was tired and lonely, and Linda knew exactly how to arrange our lives, so he relied on her version of events. If Noelle broke something, I got scolded for leaving things out. If Noelle cried, I was told to apologize for upsetting her. If I earned an award at school, Linda would smile and congratulate me, but she would immediately turn the conversation to Noelle's talents, how special her daughter was, how bright her future would be. By the time I reached high school, the dynamic was cemented. Linda saw me as competition for attention she wanted for her own daughter. Noelle floated through life cushioned by excuses and praise, and I learned to excel quietly because excelling loudly brought punishment. I studied late at night when everyone was asleep. I ran laps before school to release the stress that sat like a stone between my shoulder blades. I volunteered for everything I could not because anyone encouraged me, but because it was the only way to feel like I had value. Military recruiters came to our school my junior year. They talked about purpose and structure and opportunities for leadership. They talked about scholarships, training, travel a world beyond Amarillo. But what caught my attention most was the simplicity. Earn your rank. Do your job. Be held accountable by a clear set of rules, not the shifting moods of a stepmother determined to keep me small. The Army felt like escape. It felt like oxygen. Linda hated the idea. Absolutely not, she told my father behind the closed door of their bedroom, not realizing I was standing in the hallway listening. She thinks wearing boots will make her special. She will fail. She always does. She is not like Noelle. No grace, no charm. She was born to be ordinary. I heard my father sigh heavily. Maybe it is good for her. Maybe she needs direction. Linda scoffed. Or maybe she just wants to run away from responsibilities at home. Do not let her become one of those women who pretend they are tough. She is not. That was the moment the final thread broke. If my presence was a burden, then I would remove it. I enlisted the day I turned 18. My recruiter gave me a handshake and a delayed entry packet. Linda gave me a tight smile and said, "Well, I suppose some people need uniforms to feel important." My father drove me to basic training at Fort Leonard Wood. He cried when he hugged me goodbye. Linda stayed home citing a salon appointment. I grew in the Army in ways Linda never imagined. I learned discipline. I learned leadership. I learned that excellence spoken aloud did not get punished but rewarded. Every promotion was a quiet reclaiming of identity. Every evaluation was proof that I was more than the role Linda wanted to trap me in. When I became a commissioned officer, my father wrote me a long letter saying he had never been prouder. Linda sent a text. Good for you. Noelle, meanwhile, bounced between part-time jobs, relationships, and self-declared artistic pursuits. Linda defended every failure. She is sensitive. She is gifted. She just needs support. And yet somehow, whenever the family needed money or structure or help, always from a distance, never with gratitude, they called me. Not because they valued me, but because I was useful. That was the motif of my childhood. I was the extra piece, the filler, the reliable one who could be dismissed in public and leaned on in private. The person Linda liked to describe as dependable, but not remarkable. The one she never imagined would outrank every expectation she tried to impose. And now she had crossed a line far bolder than anything she attempted when I was a child. She had walked into my military world and assumed she could treat it like her living room. She had impersonated my authority. She had branded my last name across an Army facility to elevate Noelle's image, not because she respected me, but because she never believed I mattered enough to fight back. She was wrong. I waited until General Pierce stepped away to make a call before slipping back toward the barracks common room. Music thumped through the walls, a glossy upbeat rhythm entirely out of place in a building meant for early morning formations and late-night maintenance shifts. I took a slow breath and pushed the door open just enough to slip inside. The air was thick with the smell of catered food and perfume so strong it drowned out the usual scent of floor wax and institutional soap. White drapes hung over the windows, softening the fluorescent lights until the room looked like a hotel ballroom. A temporary bar had been set up along the far wall, complete with crystal glasses and imported liquor bottles. I stepped deeper into the room, keeping my expression flat as my eyes tracked every expensive detail. I spotted the catering station first. Silver chafing dishes lined a long table, each labeled with elegant hand-lettered signs. Herb-crusted salmon, filet mignon medallions, roasted seasonal vegetables, a dessert tower stacked with miniature tarts and chocolate cups. These were not simple party snacks. This was a high-end private menu. I shifted my gaze to the DJ booth at the corner. Professional speakers, lighting panels, a photographer with a full-frame camera weaving between guests capturing posed, candid shots. I scanned for documentation, and there it was pinned to a clipboard near the catering table, a folder full of invoices. I moved fast, pretending to look at the food while my fingers pulled the papers loose. My eyes locked on the first page, and heat shot through my chest. Total due $60,382. Beneath it, detailed itemization. Catering $27,000. Decor and rentals $11,000. DJ and audio equipment $8,000. Photography and video package $7,000. Additional service fees, vendor access, expedited delivery, the rest. At the bottom in bold typed letters, authorized by Captain Jordan Hale. Signed J. Hale. The signature was not mine, but close enough that anyone unfamiliar with my handwriting might accept it. I felt the edges of the paper tremble slightly in my hand. It was one thing to throw a party illegally. It was something else entirely to attach my name to a financial obligation that could be interpreted as a misuse of government property. As if on instinct, I reached into my uniform pocket and pulled out the small green notebook I always carried in the field. It was streaked with dust, but the pages inside were clean. I wrote 3 phrases on a blank page: wire fraud, misuse of federal facilities, identity abuse. My pen pressed so hard the tip nearly tore through the paper. As I wrote, a shadow passed beside me. A young soldier in dress uniform, probably pulled from duty roster to assist the event, stood stiffly with a tray in his hands. His rank flashed under the lights. E4, Specialist. His jaw was tight, his eyes uncertain. I stepped closer. Specialist. He hesitated, glanced to make sure no one was listening, then leaned in just a fraction. Ma'am, they said you told them to do this. He swallowed and lowered his gaze. They told us you cleared everything and that we were supposed to support the event. I let the words settle for a moment. Someone had used my rank to manipulate my own soldiers. Someone had used their trust in the chain of command to bend them into assisting a fraudulent event. That was a violation far deeper than a forged invoice. I kept my voice even. Specialist who gave you that instruction. He looked toward the balcony. The woman in the gold dress, ma'am. Your stepmother. She said you wanted everything perfect for your sister. She said you would be here later. She said you were too busy to explain, but we should go along with her. The tray in his hands wobbled slightly. Ma'am, we did not want to question an officer's family. And she said you wanted us to treat her like command-level personnel for the night. I closed the notebook and slid it back into my uniform pocket. You are not at fault. Do you understand me? He nodded quickly, relief softening his posture. I mean it, Specialist. This is not on you. But I need you to do something. His eyes lifted. Yes, ma'am. I need you to remember everything. Who told you what? What time? What instructions? Every detail matters. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Dismissed, Specialist. Keep your distance from the guests until further notice. I turned back toward the clipboard, flipping through the rest of the paperwork. Each invoice was neatly completed, paid in part through deposits already charged to a credit card under the name Linda Hale. The remaining balance was marked due upon event completion with Captain Jordan Hale listed as the secondary guarantor for vendor access. I forced myself to breathe steadily. Rage would come later. Now I needed clarity, intent, scope, evidence. I memorized the folder contents. Catering for 120 guests. Event coordination contracted through a Denver upscale planning firm. Early access for decorations approved 12 hours earlier through the fabricated email. Linda had thought of everything, but she had not thought I would return early from the training site. And she had definitely not thought a general officer would walk directly into her staged celebration. A burst of laughter erupted from the hallway. Someone clinked a glass. Someone else shouted for more champagne. The mood outside was bright and carefree, as if they were at a resort instead of trespassing on federal property. I slipped the invoices back into the folder and set the clipboard down exactly where I found it. When I stepped back into the hallway, I saw Linda at the far end of the corridor speaking with two guests. She was radiant under the artificial lights, smiling widely as she gestured around the space. One of the guests said, "This place is unbelievable. You must have special privileges." Linda laughed lightly. Well, when your daughter has military connections, you can do anything. Anything. She said the word proudly, like a trophy, like my rank had always belonged to her. Every detail I uncovered only deepened the same truth. She did not just cross a boundary. She tried to take ownership of the world I built far away from hers. She believed my hard-earned authority was convenient decoration for her social ambitions. She believed she could use my name because she never believed my name meant anything to me. She was wrong. The administrative wing of the barracks sat at the far end of the hallway, past the noise of the party and the hum of rented equipment. It was the only quiet place left untouched by the decorations and the chatter of guests who believed they were attending a private upscale engagement rather than trespassing on federal property. I pushed open the office door with the same controlled force I used during inspections. The fluorescent lights flickered once before settling into their familiar harsh brightness. Desks, filing cabinets, a computer workstation, the facility phone stacks of duty logs, everything was in its usual place except for the sign-in sheet half covered by a glossy event brochure. I set my helmet and gloves on the nearest desk and pulled the chair forward. The computer monitor blinked awake with a soft chime. My pulse steadied as I typed my CAC credentials into the system, the screen shifting into the Barracks management portal. If Linda and Noelle had staged this entire event under my authority, the trail would be here. The approval logs were time-stamped, recorded, validated. It was one thing to guess what Linda had done. It was another to see exactly how she executed it. I clicked on Facility Requests. A list of all recent submissions unfolded across the screen. Routine entries from units, a maintenance request for a broken dryer, a training setup for next week's readiness drill. Then there it was. Event access request, submitted June 13th, 2024-21-07. Authorized by CPT Jordan Hale. My teeth pressed together as I clicked it open. The request form was filled with alarming confidence. Purpose: private celebration for Hale family. Expected attendance 120 guests. Vendor access required, yes. Parking expansion requested, yes. Notes from approving officer approved for civilian access and extended hours. No supervision needed. The more I read, the harder it became to keep my shoulders relaxed. Someone had not only forged access, but forged it so casually that they assumed no one would ever question it. But it was the contact information at the bottom that made the hair on the back of my neck rise. For any concerns, contact the approving officer. Phone 719-555-8049. Email Jordan, AAE@army.mil.HIE, not Hale. A single swapped letter. I clicked on the email field, tracing the letters with my eyes as if the truth would change if I looked long enough. But it remained the same. Someone had created a fake account with full intent to impersonate me. This was no misunderstanding, no miscommunication. It was deliberate fraud designed to manipulate federal personnel and access controlled property. I pulled out my notebook again and wrote slowly across the next line. Felony impersonation. The severity of it settled heavily in the room. Someone had taken my uniform, my rank, the credibility I earned over 12 years of service, and used it as a tool for their own convenience. I clicked on the phone number listed under the contact section. The system cross-referenced all internal installation numbers. No match found. It was a burner phone or a number registered under one of Linda's countless online accounts. I leaned back once, letting the facts line up in my mind. Linda had faked my email, created fraudulent approval, accessed vendor contracts, instructed my soldiers under false authority, and used my last name to establish legitimacy. This was not a simple boundary violation. This was strategic misuse of federal channels and impersonation of a federal officer. As I sifted through more files, I noticed email attachments for vendor coordination. One message caught my attention. An event planning form stamped with a signature that looked like mine, except for the slight upward curve at the end of the name. Attached was a phone call transcript summary. Caller Hale Family Representative. Notes: Officer Hale approves full vendor access. Officer unavailable for calls due to restricted training site schedule. The line that froze me was simple. Officer Hale will not be present but sends her regards. They expected me not to be here. They counted on it. And that knowledge carried its own sting, not because of the deceit, but because of how confidently they believed I would not notice or fight back. They built an entire event on the assumption that my identity could be borrowed without consequences. My jaw tightened as I opened the security logs. Digital keycard timestamps revealed that someone had used civilian guest passes at 05:14 that morning. Those passes were only granted under officer approval. Someone in civilian clothes walked through those doors and received full building access while I was crawling through dirt and sagebrush at Pinon Canyon. As the pieces formed a pattern, one undeniable truth surfaced. Linda had executed this as if she were planning a gala at a rented event hall. Except this hall belonged to the Department of the Army. Except the name she borrowed belonged to a commissioned officer. Except the responsibility for all of it would fall squarely on me, unless I proved otherwise. A quiet knock pulled my attention to the doorway. The specialist from earlier stood there. His uniform jacket was slightly wrinkled, as if he had been wringing his hands. "Ma'am," he said softly, "we found this near the vendor lot." He handed me a printed folder, the kind wedding planners often use. On the front, it read, Hale Family Celebration Access Packet. Inside was a laminated sheet titled Jordan Hale Authorization for Vendor Access. My rank, my name, my signature, except none of it was mine. They had copied the outline of my signature from a photo on social media where I had signed a certificate for one of my soldiers. They had dragged it across a screen and replicated it. My breath stilled for one beat. She had used my signature. My actual signature. That was the final confirmation. This was an intentional forgery conducted with full awareness that it could implicate me. Specialist lingered awkwardly. "Ma'am, is everything going to be all right?" I closed the folder and handed it back to him. Everything will be handled. This is not on you." He nodded, but his eyes flicked toward the noise of the party. "They said you wanted the event to be perfect. They said you were proud of your family." I forced my voice level. "Specialist, listen to me carefully. Do not take orders from anyone who is not in your chain of command. Not even if they claim to speak for me." "Yes, ma'am." He stepped back. I turned off the monitor, gathered my notebook, and stood still for a long moment. The office hummed softly as the fluorescent lights buzzed above me. I had everything I needed to escalate immediately. I had enough evidence to justify shutting the event down and calling the military police. I had enough proof to pursue criminal charges. But one question hovered silently in the air. Should I call MPs right now or gather every possible detail first? If you were in my position, would you call the military police immediately? I re-entered the main corridor with my notebook tucked against my chest, the evidence in my mind forming clean, deliberate lines. But the moment I stepped back into the glow of string lights and chatter, the world shifted again. Laughter rolled through the air, bright and confident, as if the building belonged to them, as if the United States Army existed for their celebration. I moved closer to the center of the gathering and spotted Noelle immediately. She stood at the edge of the courtyard beneath a massive floral arch that had been dragged in from a rental truck. Soft white roses, gold ribbon, lanterns placed along the floor in an imitation of a wedding aisle, completely against Barracks regulations, completely illegal, and she posed under it as if she were the star of a magazine spread. Noelle's blonde hair shimmered under the outdoor lights, curled into perfect spirals. Her dress was pale blue, satin fitted at the waist, flowing out over the floor. A photographer circled her like she was royalty. She tilted her chin upward with that same expression she had worn since we were children, entitlement mixed with practiced innocence. She was surrounded by guests, most of them dressed in upscale attire that did not match the concrete corridors of a barracks complex. Women in sequined dresses, men in sports coats and polished boots. People snapping pictures, raising glasses, congratulating each other as if they had discovered a secret world accessible only through charm and money. I hung back near a support pillar, watching without intervening, gathering everything silently like a soldier documenting a reconnaissance target. My eyes tracked the man standing beside her. Tall, dark navy suit. Diamond cufflinks catching the light. He had the kind of posture that came from growing up knowing doors would open for him. His name was Mason. I recognized it from the planning documents. Mason Collier. His family owned a chain of ranching supply companies out of Dallas. Old money, new ambition. Noelle giggled as she whispered something in his ear. Then she placed her hand on his chest, making sure everyone around her could see the ring. A cushion-cut diamond surrounded by a halo band, probably $10,000 alone. A local guest leaned in. "It is stunning, and your fiancé's family paid for most of this top-tier event." Noelle smiled sweetly. "Actually, Jordan handled everything." She nodded toward me, though she did not know I was watching. "My sister arranged the barracks, the vendors, the approvals. She works here anyway. Cleaning staff, support staff, something like that." I watched her wave her hand dismissively. I felt the words hit like a quiet punch, not because they were new, but because she said them publicly. She reduced a United States Army captain to a background employee in front of 100 guests without hesitation. She used my rank for access while insulting the very uniform that made that access possible. Linda appeared beside her, clasping a champagne flute, glowing with satisfaction. She gestured broadly to the courtyard. This entire space, Jordan arranged it for her sister. She insisted on making everything perfect. She even said she preferred to stay in the background tonight. "That girl has always been so modest." A guest laughed. "Military folks are like that. Quiet, hard-working. Good to have around for events." Linda nodded, lowering her voice into a conspiratorial whisper that was audible to half the courtyard. "She is reliable. That is why we love having her help. She has always been more practical than remarkable." I felt my jaw lock. A slow heat spread across my spine. Something in the air shifted as if the humiliation itself was thick enough to breathe. Linda continued. "She does not mind sweeping up later. She said so herself. More laughter. Someone clapped Noelle's shoulder. "You have such a generous sister, using her connections for your engagement, and here she is helping behind the scenes." Noelle accepted the praise easily. She lifted her champagne and said loudly enough for the guests behind her to hear, "Well, someone has to do the hard work. I just show up and sparkle." The crowd laughed. Even Mason laughed, though there was a flicker of discomfort in his eyes, a hesitation he quickly hid. He did not know me, but he also did not know that the barracks he was standing in was protected federal property. He did not know that this celebration was a violation with consequences that could reach far beyond decor and champagne. I stepped closer until I stood at the edge of the circle. A few guests noticed me and shifted aside politely. Their eyes flicked over my dusty OCP uniform, the dirt on my boots, the sweat still drying from hours of field exercises. They saw an employee, a worker, someone whose presence did not match their evening attire. Linda spotted me last. Her smile widened. "There she is, our Jordan. Everyone, this is the one who made all of this possible." "Jordan, dear, do you mind taking a moment to check on the buffet line? The staff said they needed more trays." It was a casual command spoken with the softness of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I looked around slowly, letting my gaze sweep over each face in the circle. Noelle raised her brows amused. Mason glanced away uncomfortably. A woman beside him tightened her grip on her purse. I inhaled once through my nose and exhaled, keeping control the way the Army had drilled into me since my first day at basic. Then Linda added the line she had used earlier, the line she seemed to enjoy repeating. "She is here to make sure everything stays clean and orderly. She works here after all. Cleaning staff, support staff." Something like that. People laughed again. And there was the second humiliation sharper than the first. Not because they mocked me, but because they mocked the uniform on my back. They mocked the authority they had already exploited. They mocked my position while standing on federal ground I was responsible for protecting. I felt the moment crystallize inside me. Cold, precise. This was no longer a family annoyance or a social slight. This was targeted defamation carried out in front of 100 witnesses, many of whom believed the lies because they wanted to believe them, because the idea of a woman in uniform being reduced to background labor fit neatly into their assumptions of the world. For a beat, no one spoke. No one except the photographer who took a picture of Noelle under the floral arch and said, "Beautiful. Now let us get one with your family." Family! The word hit harder than any insult because I knew exactly what they meant. No one turned toward me. Not one head, not one gesture. As if I had never been part of them at all. I straightened my posture and willed my expression into complete stillness. I would not interrupt. Not yet. I would let them reveal themselves fully before I set the record straight. Justice is not loud. Justice is patient. And tonight, patience was a weapon. Linda turned away from me satisfied. Noelle lifted her glass again, radiant. And I stepped quietly back into the shadows, gathering every detail, every insult, every lie, every witness. Because humiliation only works when the target stays silent, and I had no intention of staying silent for long. I had just stepped away from the courtyard when I saw him approaching through the corridor light. Major General Randall Pierce moved with the kind of authority that parted space without effort. Even out of uniform, he carried presence the quiet gravity of decades spent in command positions. He stopped in front of me, arms crossed loosely behind his back, his expression unreadable. "Captain Hale." His voice was low but firm. "We need to talk." I followed him to a side hallway where the music faded into a muffled thrum behind the walls. He studied me for a moment, scanning my dusty OCP uniform, my tense jaw, the exhaustion still clinging to me from a 36-hour rotation. Then he turned his gaze toward the courtyard where guests laughed under string lights as if the barracks were their private estate. "Captain, this is unauthorized occupation of federal property." His words were clear and absolute. There was no softness, no hesitation, and hearing them spoken aloud by a general officer made everything inside me anchor into focus. "Yes, sir," I said quietly. "It is." He nodded once. This is not a misunderstanding. This is not a paperwork oversight. This is deliberate misuse of an army installation. He angled his head toward the party. Civilians who were not screened for access. Vendors who appear to be operating without proper contracts. Alcohol being served inside barracks. He paused, letting the severity settle. And your family using your name to justify their presence. I clenched my jaw once, then forced myself to speak evenly. Sir, they created a forged email approval under my name. They used it to access the facilities. They brought in vendors under a fraudulent identity. They instructed soldiers under false authority. He watched me carefully. Do you have documentation? I lifted my notebook slightly. Yes, sir. I have approval logs, event requests, vendor paperwork, forged signatures, and witness accounts. He let out a slow breath that sounded more like controlled disappointment than anger. Captain, if this continues even 15 more minutes, it becomes an installation-wide incident. You know the regulations. Unauthorized civilian events on federal property require immediate shutdown. He paused. The MPs should already be here. I felt my spine tighten. I knew he was right. The moment civilian guests set foot past the checkpoint without proper clearance, this entire compound should have been secured. Protocol demanded swift containment, but I also knew something else. If I shut this down now, Linda would twist the narrative. She would claim she misunderstood. She would blame vendors, blame soldiers, blame me. She would escape accountability through her usual charm and theatrics and tears. She would walk away untouched, and the damage to my name would not disappear even after the paperwork was filed. Sir, I said carefully, I am asking for time. His eyes narrowed. For what purpose? To gather enough evidence that there is no possibility of misinterpretation. I want their actions documented from every angle. I want the vendors' statements. I want the digital logs. I want to show the full extent of the fraud before the MPs arrive. He considered that. You intend to let this play out long enough to expose the entire pattern? Yes, sir. He lifted an eyebrow slightly. Captain, this is your career on the line. I know, sir. If it looks like you delayed reporting a breach, you will have to justify your decision to my office, and possibly beyond it. Understood, sir. His gaze held mine for a long moment. There was scrutiny in it, but also something else. Recognition, perhaps. Not of the situation, but of resolve. He had seen this expression before. In officers who refused to back down. In soldiers who knew exactly what they were fighting for. You believe gathering evidence will ensure the correct parties are held accountable, he said. I do, sir, and you believe your family will try to deny their role once confronted. I know they will, sir. He inhaled slowly, looking once more toward the courtyard. When he exhaled, it was a decision. Very well, Captain. You have until 1900. After that, this ends whether you have your evidence or not. Something in my chest eased, though the tension remained. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. But hear me clearly. Do not wait 1 second past 1900. If this spirals into a safety issue, if alcohol becomes a problem, if any civilian causes disruption, if soldiers are compromised, the event will be shut down immediately. Understood. And Captain. His voice sharpened. If your family attempts to interfere with your duties, you remove yourself from them physically. I will handle the chain of command repercussions. I nodded firmly. Yes, sir. He studied me again. You are composed for someone facing a personal and professional disaster. It is not my first, sir. The shadow of a smile touched his mouth, though it was brief. I will monitor from the administrative wing. Keep me updated every 15 minutes via text. Understood. The general turned to leave, but paused one last time. Captain Hale. This is an opportunity to prove something important, not to your family, to yourself. Respect must be earned, he said, but so must boundaries. Then he walked away, his figure disappearing down the corridor like a silhouette carved out of discipline and authority. When he was gone, I let out a slow exhale. 1900, 2 hours from now. 2 hours to build an airtight case. 2 hours to expose a pattern that had begun long before tonight. 2 hours to reclaim my name and my rank from people who believed they had the right to use both. As I walked back toward the courtyard, a strange calm settled inside me. Not numb, not detached, focused, purposeful. Every slight, every forged signature, every insult about cleaning staff, every lie told under my name. Tonight they would answer for all of it, and for the first time in years, I felt something I had almost forgotten: control. This was the turning point, the quiet ignition at the center of the storm. The moment revenge stopped being emotional and became strategic, and strategy was something I excelled at. The courtyard hummed with noise as I made my way toward the vendor staging area behind the barracks. Most guests remained near the floral arch and buffet tables, oblivious to the storm building around them, but the vendors were gathered near the supply trucks, taking brief breaks between service rounds. This was where the truth lived. Vendors operate on contracts and instructions. They log calls. They save texts. They remember exactly who gave them orders because the wrong instruction can cost them thousands. I approached the catering supervisor first, a middle-aged woman with a clipboard and a sharp, efficient posture. Her staff moved around her like satellites, clearing trays and refilling food. When she noticed me, she stepped forward with a businesslike smile. "You must be Captain Hale." The words punched harder than expected. She believed that identification without hesitation, because Linda had made sure she did. "Yes, ma'am," I said, steady and clear. "Captain Hale. I understand you coordinated with my family for today's event." Her brow furrowed. "Yes. Your stepmother handled everything directly. She said you wanted to cover the bill as a gift." "Cover the bill? $60,000. I felt my pulse thud once in my throat. "And she told you I personally authorized vendor access." "Absolutely. She said you were too busy to meet, but that you insisted we treat her as your representative." The supervisor flipped through her paperwork. "See? Right here. She even sent us a signed approval." She handed me a printed scan of the forged signature I had already seen. The long, swooping J, the upward tail on the last E. Close enough to fool anyone who did not know that my real signature was straight and sharp, every angle deliberate. "Did she explain why the event needed to be held on federal property?" I asked. The supervisor nodded casually. "She said it was a private celebration for your sister and that you wanted everything to feel special. She said this was the only space large enough." I tried to maintain a neutral expression, though it felt impossible. "Thank you for clarifying that. Would you mind if I took photos of your documentation for our internal review?" "Of course not." She stepped aside. "We assumed everything was legitimate. She said you handle all the Army paperwork." I nodded once. "I understand." Next, I approached the DJ. He looked younger, maybe mid-20s, wearing headphones around his neck and scrolling through a playlist on his laptop. When he saw my uniform, he straightened. "Hi, you must be the officer who booked us." "No, but I need to ask you a few questions." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, I hope everything is okay. Your stepmom said this was all approved. She kind of insisted on it." "Insisted how?" He hesitated. "She said if any of us questioned the setup, she would report us to the base commander because you were her daughter and she worked directly with military leadership." My jaw tightened. Linda had not only impersonated me, she had used the Army's authority as a threat. Did she ever say the phrase, "Jordan wanted to cover the bill"? He nodded vigorously. "Yes. Exactly that." She repeated it like 5 times. "Thank you." One by one, the vendors repeated the same story. Linda presented herself as my proxy. She used my rank as leverage. She assured them I would pay. She insisted they follow her instructions without hesitation. But the final confirmation came from the photographer. She carried 2 cameras moved with practiced grace and seemed completely unaware that she was speaking into the heart of an investigation. "Your stepmother is very assertive. That is one way to put it. She gave us exact posing instructions. She wanted a shot of the family under the arch and said you would not be in it because you were working tonight. She said you always work for them." I repeated the phrase slowly. "Work for them. Yes." Her eyes widened slightly as she remembered. She said, and I quote, "She is military. She works for us." The courtyard seemed to tilt. For a brief second, the noise around me faded into something distant. She works for us. Not a metaphor, not a slip of the tongue. An assertion of ownership, a declaration of hierarchy spoken confidently to strangers because Linda believed it to be true, or at least convenient enough to pretend it was. I thanked the photographer and stepped away, feeling the shape of something cold and calculated forming inside me. The Army had given me discipline, but before the Army, I had learned silence, endurance, survival. Tonight, those traits converged into something sharper: strategy. I walked toward the Barracks operations office where the security monitors were housed. A junior soldier on duty nodded as I entered. "Ma'am, do you need access?" "Yes, specialist. Please pull footage from 0500 to 1400 today. Exterior door cameras and interior hall feeds." He hesitated. "Is something wrong, ma'am? Just following up on an unauthorized access review." He nodded and began typing quickly. Within moments, the first video appeared. Civilians walking through the barracks doors carrying crates of decorations. Linda leading them inside with a sweeping gesture as if she owned the place. Another clip. Soldiers standing stiffly as Linda pointed them toward tables. She was snapping her fingers, directing them like hired labor, not enlisted personnel. The soldier paused the footage. "Ma'am, she told us you gave orders for her to act on your behalf. We did not want to question her." I softened my voice. "I know, specialist. You did nothing wrong." I leaned closer to the screen. There it was. Linda wearing a gold dress and smug confidence, waving toward the courtyard as if she were directing a full production team. She gestured toward the soldiers, saying something we could not hear. I rewound and pulled up the audio. It was faint, but clear enough. "She's military. She works for us." The words were there, immortalized in government-recorded footage. Not an insult, a declaration, one that would cost her everything tonight. I straightened, adrenaline threading through every muscle. This was no longer about correcting a wrong. This was about exposing the truth in a way she could never deny, never twist, never rewrite. The public humiliation would not be petty. It would be precise, measured, undeniable. I turned to the specialist. "I will need the last 3 hours compiled into a single playback file for a briefing. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am." I checked the time. 1 hour and 20 minutes until 1900. Perfect. I stepped back into the hallway, the strategy forming cleanly in my mind. I would confront them, but not privately, not quietly. They had chosen to humiliate me in front of 100 guests. I would return the favor, except mine would be built on evidence, and theirs would be built on lies. This time the truth was on my side, and the truth would speak loudly enough for everyone to hear. I returned to the administrative office with a pace that was calm on the outside but sharpened on the inside like a drawn blade. The door shut behind me with a hollow echo, and for the first time since stepping off the convoy from Pinon Canyon, I allowed myself to feel the weight of what I was about to do. Revenge was emotional. Justice was structural. Tonight, I needed the latter. I sat at the desk, pulled forward the binder of installation regulations, and opened directly to the section I knew by heart. Army Regulation 421, Facilities Engineering. It was thick, dense, bureaucratic, and absolutely unforgiving. My fingers traced down the page as muscle memory took over. Unauthorized civilian events, unauthorized vendor access, misuse of installation property, criminal exposure. Next, I pulled up the digital DoD installation rules, which every officer knew, but few ever had to enforce at a family level. As I scrolled, violations accumulated like tally marks in my head. Linda's actions did not fall into gray areas. They were not mistakes or misunderstandings. They were violations of federal law, clear, documented, repeated. Criminal trespass. The first and most obvious charge. Linda and her guests had crossed into restricted federal property without proper clearance or escort. Vendors had been granted access through a forged approval. Civilians had been permitted to roam barracks areas where soldiers lived, slept, and stored equipment. All under her instruction. Fraud against United States federal property. The second charge. The $60,000 unauthorized use of the barracks facilities. The deliberate manipulation of vendor contracts under a false identity. The financial liabilities assigned to me without consent. the falsified signatures. Fraud was not just about money, it was about intent, and hers was unmistakable. False impersonation of a federal employee. The most serious charge of all, the fabricated email address using my name, the burner phone number listed under my authority, the forged digital signature, the directive she issued to soldiers while claiming to speak on my behalf. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same truth. Linda did not simply borrow my authority, she assumed it. She used it. She weaponized it for her own gain. I wrote the 3 charges in my notebook slowly and deliberately, making sure each letter carved itself into the page. Criminal trespass, fraud against federal property, false impersonation of a federal officer. The kind of charges that stacked together carried consequences far beyond an apology or a family dispute. These were charges that could alter the course of her life. I closed the binder gently, almost reverently. Then I rested both hands on the desk and allowed myself a single quiet breath. Not out of doubt, out of preparation. What came next would be public. What came next would be final. The vendors, the guests, the fiancé, the soldiers who had obeyed orders they thought came from me. All of them would see the truth in real time, and Linda would have no shield left to hide behind. Noelle would finally understand the difference between privilege and responsibility. And my father, wherever he stood emotionally, would have to face the reality of the woman he married. I rose from the chair and turned to the specialist still working at the monitor. How much longer on the compilation file? 5 minutes, ma'am. Then it will be ready for playback. Good. Once completed, send a copy to the general. The specialist hesitated. Ma'am, are you going to show this to everyone? Yes, specialist. Everyone. He nodded slowly as if realizing he was witnessing something significant. Not just an investigation, a turning point. I walked back toward the courtyard and paused just outside the archway hidden behind the glow of string lights. For a moment, I watched the gathering unfold. Noelle posing for pictures, her smile stretched wide and glittering. Mason standing beside her, unaware that his future was about to shift beneath his feet. Guests swirling around with laughter and champagne, completely oblivious to the fact that in less than an hour this would all become an incident they would never forget. And at the center of it all stood Linda. She was directing a group of vendors as if she were orchestrating a royal gala. She lifted her hands with practiced elegance, adjusting centerpieces, scolding staff, waving graciously to guests. She played the role of matriarch and host, confident in her fabricated authority. She had no idea that the structure she built tonight was about to collapse under the weight of documented truth. I stepped forward, my boots crunching softly against scattered decorative stones. The movement caught Linda's attention. She turned, raising her glass, offering me a smile that was both mocking and patronizing. Ah, there you are, Jordan. We were wondering when you would stop hiding in the back. Do you mind checking with the catering staff again, dear? They need more napkins, and you know this place better than any of us. Her voice dripped with manufactured graciousness. Guests nearby smiled politely, believing they were witnessing harmless family dynamics. They had no idea they were witnessing impersonation, fraud, and trespass in real time. I stood tall, cleared my throat quietly, and said nothing yet, because the real moment was coming, and it would land harder if I let her dismiss me one last time. Linda brushed her hand through the air. Go on, sweetheart. Make yourself useful. That was the final line in my mental checklist, the last stroke of the match before the fire. I turned and walked back toward the administrative wing where the specialist handed me the compiled footage on a tablet. Ready, ma'am. Thank you. I tucked the tablet under my arm and checked the time. Chapter 18, Chapter 22. 38 minutes until the general shut everything down. Plenty of time to do it my way. As I returned toward the courtyard, a strange stillness settled inside me. Not calmness, not anger. Something between precision and inevitability. I was not walking into a scene. I was walking into a courtroom. Except this courtroom had 100 witnesses, bright lights, a floral arch, and a family who believed they owned me. Soon they would learn the truth. Those who exploit you publicly deserve to be exposed publicly. And tonight, justice would not whisper. It would echo. Have you ever had someone use your accomplishments or reputation for their own gain? Noelle's voice carried through the courtyard like a bell as I stepped back into the glow of string lights, tablet tucked under my arm, dust still clinging to my uniform from Pinon Canyon. Guests crowded around a three-tier cake decorated in gold accents, cameras raised, anticipation thick in the air. Noelle lifted the silver knife with theatrical flair, while Mason held her waist as if guiding a queen through a royal ceremony. The photographer counted down. 3, 2, 1. That was when I moved forward. My boots made a dull thud against the concrete floor, soft but unmistakable. Heads turned first out of curiosity, then out of confusion. A few guests murmured to each other, eyebrows raised at the sight of a dusty army captain interrupting a glamorous engagement spectacle. Noelle froze with the knife still poised above the cake. Her smile flickered. Linda, however, reacted instantly. She threw her head back and laughed loudly as if I were a beloved assistant arriving late to my duties. "There she is, our cleaner." The line rang through the air, crisp and cutting. Several guests laughed, assuming it was harmless family humor. Others looked uncomfortable, sensing something slightly off, but not yet understanding the magnitude. I did not react. I let the insult hang for a long breath, letting everyone absorb the moment exactly as she intended it. Because the louder the humiliation, the louder the reversal would hit. Noelle tilted her head at me condescendingly. "Jordan, honey, could you at least wait until after the photo? We need clean background space for these shots." Mason cleared his throat and tried to smile, but the tension around his eyes was unmistakable. I stepped fully into the center of the courtyard and placed the tablet onto the small vendor podium next to the cake table. Then, without a word, I reached behind me and flipped on the portable projector the vendors had used earlier for their slideshow. The screen lit up against the blank Barracks wall behind Noelle, forming a bright white rectangle. Conversations died instantly. The courtyard dimmed under the shift of light, and suddenly all eyes were on me. I spoke clearly. "My name is Captain Jordan Hale, United States Army." A hush swept the courtyard. A few guests' jaws dropped. Someone whispered, "She is not the cleaner." I tapped the tablet and the first document appeared on screen. The forged approval email. The header showed the sender address. Jordan J-H-A-I-E at Army.mil. I waited until murmurs rippled through the audience. Then I spoke again. "This email was used to authorize your presence on federal property without proper clearance." "It is not mine. It is fraudulent." Linda blinked rapidly, her smile cracking at the edges. "Jordan, sweetheart, what are you doing?" "Do not embarrass yourself." I tapped again. The $60 to $382 invoice appeared next. Catering. Decor. DJ. Photography. Each line totaled with my name typed under the authorization field. A second wave of gasps spread through the crowd. One woman covered her mouth. Another whispered $60,000. Mason stared at the number like it might reach out and strike him. Noelle's hand dropped from the cake knife entirely, her fingers trembling. I did not look at them. I stayed focused. This invoice was submitted to vendors with a forged signature and a false claim that I approved all charges. Linda took a step forward, chest lifted, trying to reclaim command of the space. "Now hold on. That is a misunderstanding. They told me you wanted to support your sister. You said you would handle it." I raised the volume of the projector audio. The next clip began to play. Security footage from 0546 hours. Linda walking into the barracks with a group of decorators trailing behind her carrying boxes. There was no mistaking her. Gold dress, high heels, the confident sweep of her hand as she instructed them where to place everything. The footage cut to a later clip. Linda giving orders to soldiers standing stiffly unsure what to do. The audio crackled, but the words were clear. "She is military. She works for us." A collective gasp erupted. Someone muttered, "That is impersonation." Another voice cut through. "That is not allowed." Mason stepped back from Noelle slightly, his face draining of color as he looked between Linda and me, as if realizing his future in-laws had just detonated his reputation. Noelle's breath hitched audibly. "Mom, tell me you did not." Linda's poise collapsed. She looked frantically at the guests, then at me, then at the screen, as if the footage might magically rewrite itself. I opened my notebook and read the charges aloud. Criminal trespass, fraud against United States federal property, false impersonation of a federal officer. Each word echoed against the concrete walls, landing with the weight of a judgment. Linda pointed a shaking finger at me. You are overreacting. This is just family business. You do not need to parade this in front of strangers. I met her gaze without blinking. You made it public when you impersonated my authority in front of strangers. A hush fell so complete that even the music from the DJ booth seemed to shrink. Then footsteps approached from the corridor. Crisp, confident footsteps. General Pierce entered the courtyard, his presence commanding immediate silence. His eyes swept the scene, expression unreadable. Linda straightened, smoothing her dress, attempting to regain composure. General Pierce. We were just having a misunderstanding. It has all been cleared up. There is no need for any formality. The general did not even look at her. Instead, he looked directly at the projected footage, then at the forged email, then at the invoice. Only then did he turn to her. His voice carried through the courtyard like the crack of a gavel. Mrs. Hale, you impersonated a federal officer. Linda swayed as if struck, her lips parting without sound. The gathered guests stared at her wide-eyed. Mason's parents, who had been smiling confidently 20 minutes earlier, looked horrified. Mason himself stepped away entirely, as if distance could save him from collateral damage. Noelle's hand flew to her chest. Mom! Oh my God! What did you do? Linda blinked rapidly, shaking her head in small, frantic motions. I did not mean I did not understand. I thought Jordan would not mind. We just wanted a nice event. I did not know it was serious. But the general did not waver. His tone remained steady, unyielding. Ignorance does not absolve intent. You accessed federal property under false credentials. You issued directives under a forged officer identity. You defrauded civilian businesses under the guise of military authority. The courtyard went silent for several breaths. Then a guest whispered the sentence that sealed the moment. She is going to be arrested. The ripple of shock rolled through the crowd in waves, and Linda Hale, the woman who had spent decades crafting an image of elegance, authority, and control, stood frozen, unable to speak, unable to smile, unable to charm her way out, because for the first time in her life, the truth was louder than her performance, and everyone heard it. The courtyard, moments earlier glittering with celebration, now hung suspended in a stunned and terrible quiet. The projector screen still glowed against the barracks wall, frozen on the image of Linda pointing at soldiers like she owned them. Guests shifted in uneasy heels, scraping against concrete champagne glasses, trembling slightly in unsteady hands. Even the DJ had silenced the music, uncertain whether to stand still or pack his equipment and run. The first person to break the silence was the catering supervisor. She stepped forward with the confidence of someone who had handled demanding clients for 20 years and was long past the point of tolerating nonsense. She cleared her throat sharply, drawing every eye. Mrs. Hale, she said evenly, we will need payment for the remaining $42,000 immediately. Our contract lists you as the primary payer. If you do not settle this balance, our company will pursue legal action. Linda's jaw dropped. She sputtered, turning red. Absolutely not. Jordan was covering the bill. She promised. The supervisor shook her head with a practiced politeness that was almost elegant. Captain Hale is not financially responsible. We have her statement on record. The fraud team will be alerted. A ripple of whispers spread through the courtyard. Someone muttered, "Oh, this is bad." Another whispered, "Is she going to jail?" The DJ walked over next to his laptop tucked under one arm. Mrs. Hale, we need full payment for our equipment rental. Now, you authorized overtime staging. The photographer followed. And I need my balance for tonight's event before I leave. Your card declined earlier. Every vendor, every contractor, every service member treated as background labor for Linda's grand production now stepped forward, united by one. Truth, she owed them money. A lot of it. Linda looked around frantically, the situation slipping through her fingers like sand. No, this is not how tonight is supposed to go. She spun toward me, pointing wildly. This is your fault, Jordan. How dare you humiliate your family in front of strangers? You always ruin everything. Her words rang with the desperation of someone drowning, but the guests did not buy it. Not anymore. A woman in a sequined navy dress crossed her arms. She lied to vendors. She lied to the army. And she lied about her own daughter working as cleaning staff. Another guest shook his head. This is criminal. We could get dragged into this. Linda's face twisted in disbelief as her support evaporated. She opened her mouth to argue again, but the next blow came from a direction she never expected. Mason, Noelle's fiancé. He stepped forward slowly, looking dazed, like a man witnessing the collapse of every promise he had been sold. His parents stood behind him, both stiff, both pale, both wearing the expression of people reevaluating their entire decision. Mason held Noelle's hand at first. Then he let go. Noelle blinked, confused. Mason, what are you doing? His voice cracked slightly. I need to ask something. Did you know about any of this? Noelle stared at him, stunned. Mason, I just wanted a nice engagement. Mom handled the details. I thought Jordan approved everything. Mason swallowed hard. And you thought she was cleaning staff? Noelle looked down. I didn't know, Mom said. He looked at the projector again, then at Linda, then at me, still standing in uniform, my face streaked with dried dust and hours of field training. The contrast between us could not have been sharper. Mason let out a slow, shaky breath. I am calling this off. Noelle froze as if someone had pulled the world out from under her feet. Mason reached into his pocket, slid off the engagement ring, and placed it gently into her shaking hands. I cannot marry into a family built on lies and fraud. My family cannot be tied to criminal impersonation of federal authorities. I am sorry, Noelle. The gasp that rose from the guests was visceral, a full-body reaction from an entire room witnessing public implosion. Noelle made a strangled sound. Mason, please. Please, you cannot mean that. He didn't answer. He simply turned to his parents, who nodded grimly and walked away. Noelle collapsed to her knees, sobbing hysterically. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks as she clutched the ring, shaking uncontrollably. Mom! Mom, help me! Linda rushed toward her, but before she could reach Noelle, 2 military police officers stepped into her path. Ma'am, stop! Linda reeled back like she'd hit an invisible wall. I need to get to my daughter, she cried. Let me through. The MP shook his head firmly. You need to stay where you are. Linda's voice pitched higher. Do not talk to me like that. I am the mother of... You are the subject of a federal impersonation investigation, ma'am. You are not permitted to move freely. Linda's face drained of all color. The guests scattered slightly, giving the MP's room, forming a silent ring around the unfolding scene. Meanwhile, Noelle sobbed uncontrollably on the ground. Mom, help, please get Mason back, please. But Linda couldn't go to her. She couldn't cradle her daughter or chase after the fiancé disappearing through the courtyard exit. She couldn't even move without the MPs repositioning themselves. For the first time in years, Linda had no power, no control, no audience willing to believe her. She tried one last desperate tactic, pointing again at me with trembling fury. Jordan did this. She planned this. She hates us, the MP beside her replied sharply. Ma'am, we watched the footage. You impersonated a federal officer. The captain exposed documented evidence. This is not her doing. This is yours. Another wave of murmurs rippled through the guests, many stepping farther away from her as if fraud were contagious. I stood absolutely still, watching the unraveling with steady breath. Not triumphant, not gleeful, just resolute. Justice was not a performance. It was a reckoning. And this one had been long overdue. Noelle sobbed louder, calling for her mother again, but Linda could only stare helplessly as the MPs prevented her from taking even a single step. That was the real collapse, not the engagement, not the event. It was the first moment of Linda's life when consequences finally caught up to her and there was no charm left to save her. The courtyard felt different now, not loud, not chaotic, but hollow and trembling as if the air itself had realized the truth before the people caught up. Noelle was still on the concrete, her sobs echoing through the open space. Vendors whispered among themselves. Guests drifted toward the exits, not wanting to be associated with the disaster unfolding on federal property. And Linda Hale, my stepmother, stood frozen between two military police officers staring at me with a hatred so sharp it looked like it hurt her to hold it. Then she snapped. Her voice tore through the courtyard, shrill and cracking at the edges. "You ruined her life!" Every head turned. Even Noelle, still trembling on her knees, looked up with red, swollen eyes. Linda's finger jabbed toward me, shaking with rage. "You destroyed everything. Her future, her happiness, our family, all because you have always been jealous of her." I stepped forward slowly, the dust from Pinon Canyon still clinging to my OCP sleeves. "No," I said evenly, "you did." The words didn't land softly. They hit like a recoil blast echoing in the sudden stillness. Linda blinked as if she had been slapped by truth itself. "You forged emails. You impersonated me. You used my rank. You broke federal law to play hostess at a base you have no authority to even enter." I pointed toward the projector still frozen on her, giving orders to enlisted soldiers as if they were personal staff. "You humiliated me by choice. I simply shined a light on what you did." Linda's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. For the first time, her voice failed her. Noelle crawled unsteadily to her feet. Mascara streaked down her face, shaking as she grabbed her mother's arm. "Mom, please stop. Please, just stop." But it was too late. The collapse had already begun. My father, who had been silent the entire night, stepped forward. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, like he had been dragged into someone else's nightmare, and only now realized he could not wake up. "Jordan," he said, his voice wary, unsure, was this really necessary? "You made your point. No need to take this further." He looked at the MPs, then at General Pierce, hoping someone would nod and make everything normal again. I stared at him. When exactly was I supposed to make my point? When she called me her cleaner? When she used my name to commit fraud? When she convinced my soldiers I was the one giving orders for her party? My father swallowed hard. "I just want everyone to calm down." Linda jumped in, desperate to regain control. "Jordan, talk to the general for us. Explain this is just a misunderstanding. You can fix this. You are a captain, for goodness sake. You outrank half the people here. Use that. Help us." The speed at which her anger transformed into pleading was almost dizzying. Moments earlier, I was the villain who ruined her life. Now, I was her only hope. Noelle moved closer too, clutching the engagement ring Mason had returned. "Jordan, please," she whispered. "Please just tell the general this was a miscommunication. You know how Mom gets. She didn't mean to break the rules. We didn't know it was serious." My jaw tightened. "You did not know bringing 40 civilians to a secured barracks was serious. You did not know forging an officer's approval was serious. You did not know giving illegal orders to soldiers was serious." Noelle flinched. "I'm begging you," she said, tears streaking fresh down her cheeks. "Please help us. Talk to the general. Fix this. Let us go home." "Let us pretend this didn't happen." My father stepped forward again, his voice stronger. "Jordan, she's your sister. Blood is blood. Help her." For a moment, it felt like I was 10 years old again, standing in that Amarillo kitchen, being told to swallow the unfairness because defending myself made things worse. For a split second, I felt that old ache, that tight, familiar pressure in my chest. Then it was gone, replaced by something clear and final. "No." The word dropped between us like a stone. Linda stiffened. "No," my father repeated, stunned. "You are going to let your sister lose everything. She lost everything because you two allowed her mother to weaponize my rank, my job, my integrity," I said. "You let her humiliate me for years. You let her steal anything she wanted. You let her treat me like I was disposable, and when she escalated to criminal behavior, you cheered her on." My father's jaw trembled. "That is not fair." "It is the fairest thing I have ever said in my life," I replied. Linda's face contorted. "Jordan, if you walk away right now, you will regret it." I stepped closer, meeting her eyes. "I stopped regretting things involving you a long time ago." She faltered. The MPs glanced at each other, waiting for the general's command. Guests lingered near the courtyard gate, torn between leaving and absorbing every second of the public implosion. Behind me, I heard measured footsteps approaching. "Major General Pierce." Linda's eyes lit up, desperate, hopeful. "General, please," she said, voice trembling. Jordan exaggerated. She blew this way out of proportion. "I swear, we did not know the rules." The general held up one hand, silencing her instantly. "Mrs. Hale, do not speak." Linda's mouth snapped shut. General Pierce turned to me. "Captain Hale, is there any additional information you need to present before the MPs proceed?" My entire family turned to me, begging, pleading silently. "Help us! Lie for us! Fix this! Protect us!" But this time, I did not bend. "Negative, sir. They stripped my authority. They abused my name. They endangered my soldiers. I have nothing left to add." The general nodded. "Understood." He turned to the MPs. "Proceed." Linda gasped. "No, Jordan, please," Noelle cried. Dad whispered, "Jordan, wait, please, wait." But I shook my head once. The consequences are theirs, not mine. The MPs stepped forward. The courtyard erupted in whispers, shock, disbelief, but not sympathy. The public humiliation was complete, the revenge arc sealing itself without theatrics. Choices finally had consequences. As they escorted Linda toward the administrative office for processing, my father and Noelle watched me as if seeing me clearly for the first time. Jordan Noelle whispered one last time, "Help us." I felt the words settle on my shoulders, light, not heavy. No. And for the first time in my life, that single word felt like freedom. If you were in Jordan's shoes, would you forgive them or let them face the consequences? The aftermath did not unfold in a single dramatic explosion. It came in waves, steady and unstoppable, the way a disciplined formation advances until the field is unquestionably theirs. The first wave hit Linda Hale less than 24 hours after the incident. At 0900 sharp, she was escorted into the installation magistrate's office for formal processing. She tried to speak, tried to charm, tried to rationalize, but none of that mattered in a space governed by federal regulation rather than social performance. By 1100, the penalties were finalized. A criminal fine for unauthorized access and misuse of federal facilities, a formal reprimand for false impersonation of a federal employee, a permanent ban from entering any military installation in the United States. Permanent meant permanent. No base events, no spouse clubs, no ceremonies. No ability to attend any future milestone in my career. No military exchange, no community activities. She was effectively erased from the world she had exploited for attention. When the paperwork was handed to her, she crumpled in her chair. The base legal clerk later told me she stared at the page for almost 2 full minutes before whispering, "This cannot be happening." But it was, and it was only the beginning. The second wave hit Noelle. Her engagement ended publicly and irrevocably. The fiancé's family issued a written statement to their extended relatives citing misrepresentation fraud, adjacent behavior, and concern over future liability. The statement circulated quietly but thoroughly across their social network. Within 48 hours, Noelle's social media accounts were disabled after hundreds of comments asked about forged emails and impersonating military authority. She had once built her identity on curated aesthetics and expensive filters. Overnight, the glitter cracked. She became the woman whose mother impersonated an army captain to throw a $60,000 party. I thought. She became the woman abandoned at her own engagement celebration. The pity was sharp, the judgment sharper. Her friends divided. Half distanced themselves. The rest pretended to comfort her while whispering in private threads. Her reputation did not simply suffer, it dissolved. She tried reaching out to me once through a short message. "Jordan, I do not know who I am anymore. Please talk to me." I stared at it for a long time before archiving it without replying. Consequences were not cruelty. They were clarity. The third wave was aimed at me but delivered in the opposite direction. At 0730 the following Monday, I was called into the battalion headquarters. I walked in fully expecting a tense discussion about protocol, but instead found Major General Pierce and my battalion commander waiting. Captain Hale, the general, began. What you did on Friday prevented a significant breach of military protocol and preserved the integrity of this installation. He handed me a folder. A commendation for integrity and decisive leadership. Not disciplinary action. Recognition. While Linda had been telling strangers I was nothing but a cleaner, the Army was telling me I had acted with honor. I felt something loosen in my chest in that moment, a weight I had carried silently for years without acknowledging it. Outside the building, soldiers from my company stood waiting. Word had traveled through the barracks like wildfire. At first, I thought they were gathering for formation, but then Specialist Cordero stepped forward. "Ma'am, the way you stood up for the unit? It meant something to all of us." Several soldiers nodded. One said quietly, "We thought you were going to get buried under their mess, but instead, you buried the mess." There was laughter, genuine and warm. Respect, not forced, but earned. For years, Linda had tried to define me by diminishing me. But here in the Army, in the place she mocked the most, my value was unquestioned. The respect was not loud, but it was solid, the kind that lasts longer than any humiliation someone else tries to inflict. The fourth wave belonged to my father, though he did not feel its full force immediately. That came later as he tried to justify Linda's behavior to extended family friends and neighbors, until eventually he ran out of people willing to nod politely. Some asked why he allowed Linda to treat me the way she had. Others asked whether he understood how serious impersonating a federal officer could be. He had no good answers. Denial cannot survive in the presence of documented evidence. Several months later, he would tell me Linda had become withdrawn, embarrassed, unable to attend social events because people whispered behind her back. I listened quietly, offering neither comfort nor condemnation. Some truths unfold without intervention. As consequences rippled outward, I found myself calmer than I expected. I did not feel triumphant or vindictive. I felt steady, grounded. What happened was never about ruining them. It was about protecting my name, my rank, my soldiers, and the installation I am sworn to serve. Some colleagues told me later that the entire brigade had heard about the incident within 2 days. Rumors exaggerated many details, but one theme stayed consistent. Captain Hale does not tolerate misuse of authority. I wore that reputation the way I wore my uniform, with discipline and quiet pride. By the end of the week, the courtyard was returned to normal. Decorations hauled away. Vendors compensated by emergency base funds, with Linda's fines designated to reimburse the government. Soldiers went back to their routines. The sun set and rose over Fort Carson exactly as it had before, but something had changed. Not in the base. In me. I walked the halls knowing I had defended more than regulations. I had defended myself, and the Army had stood behind me. Consequences had been delivered not because I demanded revenge, but because accountability was overdue. Linda lost her access. Noelle lost her future as she imagined it. My father lost the illusion that silence equals peace. And I gained something far more valuable than their approval. I gained the certainty that I never needed it. 6 months after the courtyard implosion at Fort Carson, my life looked almost unrecognizable. Cleaner, quieter, sharper around the edges in a way that felt earned rather than imposed. I had transferred to Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington, a move that had been in the works long before the engagement disaster, but now felt like a perfectly timed severing of the last frayed threads connecting me to the chaos my stepfamily had created. The air in Washington was different, cooler and damp, carrying the scent of fir trees and rain instead of the dry dust of Colorado. The parade fields were bordered by towering evergreens, and the mountains stood watch like silent custodians. Every morning as I walked across the installation toward my new office, I felt a strange sense of gratitude that surprised me, not for what I had endured, but for what had been stripped away. Without the constant pull of trying to be the daughter Linda approved of or the sister Noelle wanted to parade, I took up space differently. I breathed differently. I existed without apology. Then the phone calls started. The first came 3 days after I officially checked in. Unknown number, Colorado area code. I stared at it for 1 ring, then 2. On the third, I let it go to voicemail. When I checked the audio later, I heard nothing at first, just shaky breathing. Then Linda's voice strained and brittle. "Jordan, it's your mother calling. Please, I need you to call me back. We need to talk about the ban. You can fix this. You know people. You wear the uniform. You can explain. I did not mean harm. Please call me." I deleted it. The next day, another voicemail arrived. "Jordan, please, I cannot even attend your father's retirement event next spring. Do you understand how humiliating this is? I have been banned from every base in the country. They treat me like a criminal. They will not reconsider unless you speak for me. Please, I am begging you." Delete. By the fourth voicemail, her tone changed from pleading to sharp. "Jordan Hale, I am still your stepmother whether you like it or not. You have an obligation to help me. Families stand together in difficult times. This ban is destroying my life. You cannot just ignore this. You cannot do this to your family. Delete." Calls came at odd hours, early morning, late at night, twice during lunch. She left 14 messages in 6 weeks, each one a little more frantic, a little more unraveling, a little more desperate than the last. What she did not understand was simple. I was not ignoring her to punish her. I was ignoring her because the version of me who once felt responsible for her emotional well-being no longer existed. She had humiliated me publicly. She had risked my career. She had used my rank, my identity, and my soldiers as props. Her consequences belonged to her, not to me, not anymore. Around week 8, the calls stopped. Silence replaced them. A silence I welcomed. Then the emails began. Not from Linda, from Noelle. The first arrived with a subject line that said simply, "Please read." Against my better judgment, I opened it. "Jordan, I know you have every right to hate us. I know what Mom did hurt you. It hurt all of us. But please understand, she is falling apart. She cannot sleep. She cannot eat. She is terrified to leave the house because people whisper about her. She says the ban makes her feel like she is exiled from the country. Please talk to the army for her. You are the only one who can help." I archived it, not deleted. Just placed it in a folder I named Noise. The next email came 3 days later. "Jordan, please, I am serious. Mom is desperate." I am desperate. She cannot get a job because everyone Googles her and finds the impersonation report. She says she never meant to hurt you. She says she thought it would be a fun event, a private celebration. She never wanted it to go that far. Archive. A week later, a third message arrived longer than the others, nearly a full page of text. Noelle recounted their unraveling lives, how friends stopped inviting them to gatherings, how the fiancé's family circulated warnings about their behavior, how their social circle in Texas shrank until it barely existed, how Mom cries almost every night, how Dad blames himself, how everyone blames everyone, how nothing feels whole anymore. She ended with a sentence meant to pierce me. "Jordan, please do not leave us behind. We are still your family." I sat with that one for a moment. Let the words exist. Let myself feel whatever remnants of obligation tried to surface. Then I clicked archive. Their downfall was not my victory. It was simply the inevitable path of people who believed rules did not apply to them. Meanwhile, my new life at JBLM grew roots quickly. My soldiers respected me. The command team appreciated clarity. The long, gray Washington mornings suited me more than I had expected. I ran the Pine Flats Trail on weekends. I drank coffee from a tiny shop off base that roasted beans in a back room that smelled like cedar. I found my own rhythm again. One afternoon in late October, as I walked back from a briefing, I paused outside my office. Rain tapped lightly on the walkway railing. Everything smelled like pine needles and wet earth. I stood there realizing something important. For the first time in my adult life, my peace did not come from holding things together. It came from letting them fall. Family ties are not obligations, they are choices. And I had finally chosen myself. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me from the thought. New email. From Noelle. Subject line. Last attempt. I did not open it. I did not need to read another plea, another justification, another emotional appeal. I archived it with the others. Then I walked into my office, closed the door gently, and breathed in the quiet of a life no longer tethered to chaos. It was early November when the past finally came knocking in person instead of through voicemails and pleading emails. Washington rain misted across the parking lot outside the headquarters building, soft and cold, clinging to my uniform as I walked toward my truck after a long shift. The air smelled like wet pine and asphalt, a scent I had come to associate with peace. I had just reached for the door handle when I heard a voice I had not heard outside childhood memories. Jordan. I froze. Not from fear, but from recognition. My father stood a few steps behind me. His posture slumped in a way I had never seen growing up. He looked smaller than I remembered, as if the weight of the last 6 months had carved years into him. His jacket was soaked at the shoulders. His hair, once neatly combed, was peppered with more gray than before. He had driven 24 hours straight from Texas to Washington. I knew that without him needing to say it. People carrying guilt tended to travel fast. I turned slowly. Dad, what are you doing here? He tried to smile but failed. I came to talk. Please. Just a few minutes. I should have left. I should have told him to email me through the proper channels like everyone else. But something in his face, something tired and heavy and all too familiar, made me pause. I nodded once and walked toward one of the picnic tables near the headquarters entrance. He followed. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The rain thickened slightly, turning the edges of his jacket dark. Finally, he exhaled. Your stepmother is not doing well. She barely leaves the house. People whisper. She feels trapped. She feels punished. I waited. He continued. And Noelle? She is still heartbroken about the engagement. Everything has fallen apart. Our family is in pieces, Jordan. We need you. I kept my hands folded on the table. Need me for what? To talk to someone. He said quickly to call your general or your commander to explain the situation. Maybe they can lift the ban, maybe they can reduce the fines, maybe they will listen to you. His voice cracked on the last word. Because you are the only one they will listen to. I stared at him, letting his words settle not with anger, but with clarity. So that was why he came. Not to apologize, not to understand, not to acknowledge the truth, but to ask me to clean up after them again. He reached across the table, placing his hand over mine. Jordan, please. She is your mother. She raised you. I pulled my hand away gently but firmly. She is not my mother. He winced. We have always been a family. She made mistakes, but family forgives. Family helps. You know this. I let out a slow breath, feeling something old inside me loosen. Dad, in all the years you and Linda have known me, did you ever once ask how I felt when she belittled me? Did you ever step in when she called me ungrateful or accused me of ruining her plans? Did you ever defend me when she mocked my career or implied I was a disappointment? My father looked down. His silence told the truth he never had. I continued. Do you remember the night before I left for basic training, when Linda told the neighbors I was going to the army because I couldn't make it in college? You said nothing. Do you remember when I came home on leave and she made me wait outside because she said the uniform made her house look like a recruiting office? You said nothing. My father closed his eyes. Jordan, please. And when she pointed at me in front of that entire courtyard and called me her cleaner when she used my rank and my career as props for her entertainment when she committed federal crimes using my name. You blamed me, not her. He swallowed hard. I never meant to hurt you. I shook my head. You never meant to protect me either. He looked up, and for the first time in my life, I saw something break in him. Not frustration, not anger, but recognition. The truth was undeniable now, laid bare in the quiet Washington rain. Jordan, he whispered, I am asking you as your father to please help us. I leaned back, feeling the distance between us stretch into something permanent. Dad, all my life I tried to earn a place in a family that never treated me as part of it. I tried to be understanding, patient, forgiving. I shrank myself to make room for people who never once made room for me. But those days are gone. He blinked, stunned, as if he had expected resistance, but not this kind of finality. You let her treat me like this for 20 years. The words came out steady even. Not an accusation anymore, just a fact spoken aloud. He opened his mouth. No sound came out. I stood up slowly, adjusting my jacket. Dad, I hope you find a way to rebuild your life. I truly do, but I am no longer responsible for cleaning up the consequences of choices you made by staying silent. He stood too, reaching for my arm. Jordan, wait. Please, wait. We can fix this together. We can start over. We can... I stepped back before he touched me. No, we cannot. Not like this. Not anymore. The rain thickened, then softened, tapering back into a mist as if the moment itself was exhaling. My father looked at me like a man discovering loss for the first time, not because I had walked away, but because he finally understood I was not coming back to the version of myself he relied on. I turned toward my truck, opened the door, and paused only long enough to say one final, quiet truth. I choose peace, Dad, not pain. I climbed in, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot, leaving him standing there in the drizzle, hands at his sides, shoulders sagging. There was no satisfaction in the moment, no triumph, only acceptance that some chapters close, because keeping them open costs too much. If you were in Jordan's shoes, would you help them or let them face the consequences on their own? The parade field at Joint Base Lewis McChord looked almost unreal at sunset, the wide stretch of grass glowing amber beneath a sky streaked with lavender and soft gold. PT groups had long since dispersed. The training lanes were quiet. Even the distant hum of aircraft from McChord Field had faded into a low, comforting backdrop. I stood at the edge of the field in my duty uniform boots, planted firmly in the damp Washington soil, watching the last sliver of daylight sink behind the jagged ridge of Mount Rainier. For the first time in a long time, the silence did not feel empty. It felt earned. My breath formed faint mist in the cooling air as I let my shoulders relax, letting the weight of the past loosen one strand at a time. 6 months ago, I walked into a courtyard at Fort Carson covered in dust and humiliation after 36 hours in the training field, only to find my rank stolen, twisted, and used as party decor by the very people who claimed to be my family. 6 months ago, I stood in front of 100 guests and watched a lifetime of manipulation ignite under its own lies. 6 months ago, I let a truth settle so deeply into my bones that I knew I would never be the same. And I was grateful for it. I glanced down at my hands, steady now, stronger than they had ever felt. They no longer carried the tremor of childhood resentment or the old habit of shrinking to make inconvenience easier for others. Here, surrounded by soldiers who respected me, a command team that trusted me, and a mission that mattered, I had found what it felt like to stand without apology. The crisp air brushed against my face as memories drifted into focus. Linda's voice calling me the cleaner. Noelle's insistence that family meant forgiveness on demand. My father's final plea in the rain. All of them had once been heavy boulders chained to my ankles, but now they were only shadows passing and dissolving at the edge of the field. I whispered it quietly, more to the wind than to myself. They used my rank to humiliate me, but integrity is the one rank no one can fake. The words settled into the ground like they belonged there. Integrity, the very thing Linda tried to imitate through forged authority, had been the same thing that dismantled her lies. Double-edged, unshakable. The reason I had survived every attack on my character and career. The reason soldiers saluted with pride when I walked by. The reason Major General Pierce trusted me to handle the incident with clarity rather than rage. The reason I was still standing here upright, unbroken, and finally at peace. A group of junior soldiers jogged past the far side of the field, laughing as they cooled down from evening PT. One of them waved when he recognized me. Evening ma'am, evening specialist. Their respect came naturally unforced, rooted in who I was, daily, not in who I was related to. I never realized how powerful that could feel until I lived it. I turned my gaze back toward the horizon, watching the sky shift into deeper purple. The kind of color that promises a cold night but a clear morning. That was what this moment felt like. The quiet victory of surviving a storm I did not start. The calm after choosing boundaries instead of bitterness. The freedom of stepping out of a family that only valued me for what I could provide, not for who I was. I walked farther into the field, letting the soft grass bend under my boots. Each step felt like closing a door that had been cracked open for years, letting in drafts of guilt and obligation. Here in the open air, the past no longer had claws. It had echoes. Nothing more. Justice is not always a loud, dramatic collapse. Sometimes it is simply choosing to stop allowing people to use your silence, your kindness, your forgiveness as a free pass for their behavior. Sometimes justice is deciding you will not hold the rope anymore while someone else pulls you into their chaos. Sometimes justice is walking away. I stopped at the center of the field. The air hummed with stillness, the kind that makes you aware of your heartbeat and the pulse of your own life. A quiet victory. That was what this was. Not a triumph you could display on a PowerPoint slide or pin on a uniform, but a deep internal knowing that I had protected the most important thing I carried, my integrity. The sun dipped completely behind the mountains, leaving only a glow and the faintest line of pink at the horizon. The wind picked up just slightly, brushing against me like a gentle nudge forward. And that was when I spoke aloud the message I knew I wanted to leave with anyone listening, anyone watching, anyone who had been where I was. Justice is not loud. Sometimes it is simply refusing to be used again. The words drifted out across the field, carried by the wind, disappearing into the tree line. But I knew they would linger where it mattered. I took a final breath, savoring the cool air, before turning toward the walkway that led back to the company building. My steps were steady, sure, confident. I knew who I was. I knew what I stood for. And for the first time, I knew I did not owe my peace to anyone's approval, but my own. Should Jordan forgive them? Or should she let them face the consequences alone? Comment below.